Good morning, y'all. This is Melody with Unlosable Life. I was going to make it short of this, but I tend to get long winded about the Bible, so it's hard for me to keep it short. Um, I'm reading through Nehemiah in my chronological reading plan. The Judeans were still in Babylonian captivity, but the Babylonian king had allowed them, a few of the Nehemiah, his cupbearer, to bring a few of the Judeans back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls of the city. And there was a lot of opposition. They they prayed, they did their part, but they continued working, and God gave the increase. He helped them finish the walls. And at one point after they finished the walls, they brought in Ezra the scribe, and he was reading the law of God to them, and they were realizing and learning all these things that they had forgotten and that they hadn't done in decades. And so, like, when they finished the walls, one of the things was the Feast of Booths. They realized that it was at the time of the Feast of Booths, it was a celebration of God's provision for 40 years in the wilderness, and they were supposed to commemorate that, and it was the end of the fall harvest, and they were supposed to have this festival to thank God and remember everything that God had done for them. And it was perfect timing because he had done so much for them. Even in the midst of their sin, even in the midst of their shortcomings and the captivity, God was still merciful and he was still good to them. He still provided for them. And one of the things that made me think of was the way that we need to allow the law of God to inform our lives. That so often I think we go to the word, especially, I think this is easy to do, especially when we go to the word looking to feel better. And yes, the word of God has a lot of assurance, and I'm not saying that's a thing that don't do that, but let's not do that all the time. Let's not always go to the word of God for assurance, because then we're worshiping a God who only does what we want and only confirms our feelings, when we need to, instead of letting our experiences inform the word of God, we need to let the word of God inform our experiences. So one example I can think of is church hurt. Church hurt is a very real thing, and people hurt people because we're sinful and we're fallen and we make mistakes. But so often people turn away from God and they turn away from the church because of those things. They're allowing their experiences to inform their decisions about God, and that is not God. We're called to be ambassadors, and we try our best, but we are flawed and we are fallen. And that does not dictate who God is. Another example is our sin. We don't like being convicted of sin sometimes, and so what happens is we have this sin in our life that we don't necessarily want to get rid of. But we go to the word looking for, and it's easy to twist passages or take things out of context or isolate verses or cherry pick things to make us feel better about living in sin. And that's not who God is either. And so there's just a couple of examples, but I think what I want to encourage us all to do, myself included, is when we go to the Bible, we need to think about what voices are we, whose voices or what kind of leanings do we have as we come to the Bible? Are we totally opening ourselves up to hear from God in his word, to really read and take it all in and allow our lives to change because of it? Or are we allowing some outside voices to speak to us and tell us how we should approach the word of God? Because it should be the other way around. We need to let the word of God inform what we do every day and how we view God. We need to view God for who he really is and not who the world tells us he should be. I hope y'all have a great day, and I'm praying for all y'all, and let's grow in the unlosable together.